This may look like an unsuspecting arcade cabinet, but like another inconspicuous machine, it actually set off a catastrophic chain of events, the ramifications of which we're still grappling with to this day. But before I can tell you about this monstrosity, let's make sure we're all caught up on what led us here. Hi, I'm Jonii. I made a video about Ms. Pac-Man once. Let's recap. In 1980, Namco released the original Pac-Man to Japanese arcades, and later that year, Midway got a hold of the license and brought it to America. To say it was a hit would be a gross understatement. Midway, having just fallen into an ocean of money, wanted to follow up quickly, but Namco was dragging their heels developing the sequel. Enter GCC, a group of MIT dropouts who made enhancement kits for arcade machines, basically old school mods. They'd already done one for Missile Command called Super Missile Attack that got them into some hot water with Atari. There's a great article on Fast Company written by Ben Edwards that goes into more detail on the specifics of this early history, but to put it very basically, they somehow managed to negotiate their way into becoming a second-party developer for Atari. One of the conditions, however, was that they could no longer sell enhancement kits without permission from the original manufacturers of the machines being modified. Feeling empowered, they showed off a Pac-Man enhancement kit they'd been making to Midway, who were eager to scoop it up and make it official. Originally called Crazy Otto, this game would evolve into Ms. Pac-Man as something of a tribute to the original game's large female fanbase. Ms. Pac-Man ended up being more successful than Namco's own crappy sequel, Super Pac-Man, and went on to see numerous re-releases and spin-offs of its own, with the character becoming an integral part of Pac-Man's family. GCC moved on after working out a revised royalty agreement with Namco and Midway in 1983, but at some point, Namco stopped making good on their end of the bargain. In the mid to late 2000s, former GCC employee Kevin Curran saw this 20th anniversary cabinet and said, "Hey, shouldn't we be getting paid for that?" So the artists formerly known as GCC sued Namco, and the courts decided, yeah, you should. So they began receiving royalties for most future re-releases of the game and uses of the character. As a result, Ms. Pac started to become scarce around 2005, with most console and coin-op arcade releases drying up, and her last new video game appearances for a decade being in 2006's Pac-Man World Rally and 2008's Mario Kart Arcade GP2. Not to get too off track, but she did also randomly show up in 2018's Super Smash Bros. Ultimate as a part of the Pac-Land stage, as well as a limited event in the Sonic Dash mobile game the same year before being put back into the box. The specific details of the lawsuit are messy, but one important thing to note is that after the dust settled, the original game continued to see a few re-releases on things like home consoles and phones, with GCC receiving a cut of the royalties. Due to the wording of the original 1983 legal agreement, however, they would only make royalties from arcade cabinets if they were literally coin-operated. So things like an arcade one-up replica you play at home wouldn't make these guys a cent. As a result, Namco's Amusement Division still included the game in some of their cabinets intended for home use, while humorously excluding it from the versions that fit the coin-operated descriptor. The GCC successors did still get some big wins out of this 2000s lawsuit, however, namely this paragraph here. The final agreement specifies that the successors are paid for electronic distribution of their work on Ms. Pac-Man. The term electronic distribution here is defined as, quote, any use in which the images, sounds, and characters of the Ms. Pac-Man game are broadcast or in any other way transmitted and are intended to be received using devices connected to home television sets or other receiving devices. Such methods of transmission include, but are not limited to, cable television, television broadcast, satellite broadcast, including direct broadcast satellite, and any other means of use of the games where the game images, sounds, and characters are transmitted from a source remote from the receiving device. In everyman terminology, this means that if you bought Ms. Pac-Man on an Xbox or PC or phone or plug and play after this was decided, GCC got a cut. Notice how it also specifies characters, which would presumably mean that any use of Ms. Pac-Man herself in another game or cable television broadcast would also entitle the successors to a cut. After the lawsuit, some games and promotional events would use characters that acted as obvious stand-ins for Pac's deceased wife, like Pac-Marie from the Pac Store pop-up shop, or Pac-Man Girl from the mobile game Mega Run Meets Pac-Man. But more often than not, console games would skirt around her while she still turned up on the occasional bit of merchandise. The official Pac-Man Twitter account was unfazed, though. They'd do things like celebrate the anniversary of Ms. Pac-Man Maze Madness, or use a little video of a Ms. Pac mascot costume for their International Women's Day tweet. Our story is, however, about to reach a turning point. The year is 2019.
Duh.
This arcade cabinet is at the center of a lawsuit. Bandai Namco Entertainment of America versus AtGames. How could a humble manufacturer of cheap handhelds that Walgreens had to return en masse possibly have done anything wrong? Let's dig into the court documents for the juicy deets. Thanks to Owen Good from Polygon for sharing these. They're publicly available on Scribd if you want to read through them. Comedic exaggerations aside, I'm going to try to represent both companies and their statements as fairly as possible. Let's start with Bandai Namco's initial complaint. You know what? I say Bandai Namco a lot. I'm just going to start shortening their name to Bamco. It's cringe, but it's going to save us a lot of time. Bamco alleges that in August 2018, they began discussions with the former employees of GCC, who I'll be referring to as the successors from here on out, to negotiate a final legal agreement, resolving the Ms. Pac madness once and for all. I might have been out of video if they'd done that, so thanks for all the views, guys. They continued active discussions for a full year, but in the background, shady deals were being made. AtGames, as I mentioned, manufactures things like plug-and-play consoles and handhelds featuring classic video games. The company was founded in 2001, really coming to prominence over the next 2 decades, partnering with companies like Atari, Taito, and Sega. Infamously, AtGames confirmed they were working on the Genesis Mini in 2019 before Sega promptly booted them to the curb and replaced them with M2. They're not exactly a beloved company. Their relationship with Bamco, as detailed in this court document, dates back as early as 2012. Pinkong Shung, the CEO of AtGames, contacted Bamco around June of that year, hoping to strike a deal to manufacture plug-and-plays with old Namco games. He specifically mentioned wanting to use Ms. Pac-Man, and like a villain origin story, Bamco struck him down, presumably planting a seed of resentment that would eventually blossom into a vast forest of hatred. The two companies did eventually foster a proper working relationship later that decade, although the fruits of said partnership are a bit controversial. One notable example is the 2017 version of the Atari Flashback Portable, which, instead of using the infamous 1982 version of Pac-Man for the Atari 2600, uses a homebrew version created by a fan called Pac-Man 4K, specifically the 2015 version created by Dintar 816. AtGames seemingly did not inform Dintar that they were using his work, although they did eventually talk privately to work things out, with Bamco also approving of the homebrew's use. To make things weirder, some earlier versions of the handheld seem to use an older version of Pac-Man 4K, developed by a different fan, Dennis Debra. It's unclear if they contacted them for use of their work either. Definitely sketchy if true, although this one isn't mentioned in the lawsuit. No, we're actually looking at another AtGames console, the 2018 Bandai Namco Flashback Blast. One of the grievances brought up in this suit surrounds this plug-and-play, which was infamously sent to reviewers with arcade ROMs, while the retail version instead used poorly stretched and smoothed NES ROMs. This caused several reviewers, notably YouTuber John Hancock, to revoke their initial positive reviews. AtGames did the rational thing, arguing with upset fans on Twitter.com. Although they don't specifically name this product in the lawsuit, the description provided lines up with a piece of Bamco's claim, where they allege that a 2018 AtGames product contained a version of Pac-Man that materially differed from the version they'd approved. They also mention a third-party company logo appearing during the boot-up sequence of Pac-Man, which would presumably be Tengen, a subsidiary of Atari that originally published Pac-Man on the NES. AtGames did scrub Tengen and Nintendo's names from the title screen, but Tengen's name is actually still visible during the Ghost roll call. This claim, though, is small potatoes compared to some of the other accusations Bamco is levying at AtGames. The big ones naturally revolve around Ms. Pac-Man. Things started getting shaky around a year after legal negotiations between Bamco and the successors.
On or around July 26, 2019, an affiliate of Bandai Namco was contacted by a current licensee advising that they were aware of someone from AtGames reaching out to indicate that they were obtaining arcade rights for Ms. Pac-Man from the GCC successors.
My God.
This was obviously a big red flag for a couple reasons. As I understand it, the 2008 agreement between Bamco and the GCC successors did grant the successors royalties when Ms. Pac-Man, the game or the character, were used in certain contexts, as I outlined earlier. Steve Golson details some of this in a public talk he gave for the Game Developers Conference.
Buy more for your phone.
But as Bamco very extensively explains in this 2019 complaint. They are the exclusive owners of the Ms. Pac-Man copyright. They can do anything they damn well please with the game or the character, and all the successors can do is sit back and collect royalties. So even if AtGames were to do something unthinkable, like say, buy up GCC's share of the property, they wouldn't just be able to do whatever they want with it. Even if AtGames were only after royalties, Bamco probably wouldn't be too pleased with that either. As I mentioned earlier, they've been pretty heavily restricting their use of Ms. Pac-Man for years at this point, presumably in an attempt to pay as few royalties as possible. Why else would they have been in talks with the successors for the last year? It's technically speculation on my end, but I have to assume that when Bamco talks about resolving their relationship with the successors, they mean finding a way out of paying those royalties and attaining the rest of the Ms. Pac rights for themselves. Bandai Namco and AtGames did have other dealings going on in the summer of 2019. After all, 2020 was going to be Pac-Man's 40th anniversary. So, in late July, the two companies had a phone call discussing their plans to celebrate this milestone. But, according to Bamco, whoever was on the phone at AtGames kept shifting the conversation to the topic of Ms. Pac-Man. Provided as evidence is an email exchange between a PKH from AtGames, possibly CEO Ping Kong Shung, and the head of Bamco's licensing department.
Thank you for the call. Quick recap. We did not claim to be licensed by Bandai Namco for Ms. Pac-Man products. The categories that have already received Ms. Pac-Man licenses were granted earlier before the wait policy. For our categories, our intention/interest remains unchanged that we pay GCC a separate royalty in addition to our direct royalty to Bandai Namco. Let me know if I missed anything.
Hi PK, thank you for the call. Just one quick confirmation. Our partner told us that AtGames told them that they have acquired licenses of Ms. Pac-Man for both arcade and consumer game from GCC. Can you please confirm that this is not what you claimed?
Lol, no, we didn't make such a claim. You will be the first one we come to. Who's this strange partner? We don't speak with anybody about this type of sensitive and confidential things.
A few weeks after that email was sent, Kevin Curran, one of the successors, informed Bamco that AtGames had contacted him, asking about the possibility of acquiring GCC's royalty interest in Ms. Pac-Man. They'd also told Kevin that they'd been talking to Walmart about potentially selling this, and that Walmart was very interested. This arcade cabinet was manufactured by AtGames as a mock-up, although apparently the successors took it as officially licensed. A week and a half after this, AtGames contacted Bamco again, bearing a message.
We hereby notify Bandai Namco that AtGames has acquired all the right title, claim, and interest of GCC in and under all agreements, contracts, licenses, commitments, undertakings, and other legally binding agreements between GCC and Bandai Namco, as amended to date.
AtGames, drunk with power, got to work trying to get Ms. Pac products into production as quickly as they could. Less than a week after learning they'd been legally cut for the foreseeable future, Bamco received an unsolicited email from a GameStop rep, informing them that he and PK had been working on some type of Ms. Pac-Man product for GameStop, and that they wanted Bamco in on it too. Bamco was more than a little annoyed, because if you'll remember, the GCC stake in Ms. Pac-Man, which now belonged to AtGames, did not allow them to do whatever they pleased with the property. Bandai Namco are the rights holders, the ringleaders. They get final say over everything. And suddenly AtGames comes strolling in like they own the place, chomping on a cigar and calling shots? This could not stand. A smackdown of the highest magnitude was in order. Later that same month, Bamco filed their lawsuit against AtGames, accusing them of causing irreparable harm to their reputation with that flashback unit, as well as misleading distributors and consumers with their unlicensed Ms. Pac-Man product, potentially damaging Bamco's relationship with licensees and distributors. In AtGames' official response, they push back on some of Bamco's larger points. Firstly, they say that their use of the Ms. Pac-Man IP was too minor to warrant any type of copyright infringement, arguing that they'd only discussed hypothetical products with potential retailers, making it known that Bamco owned the rights to the game. Little weird to do that before consulting them, but Okay. Additionally, they claim that Bamco was made perfectly aware of these uses, which in a way, I guess they were. They filed the lawsuit after all. AtGames mentions the creation of 3 prototypes made to discuss potential products, mock-ups if you will. The home arcade cabinet was shown to Kevin Curran in the hopes that he could help AtGames get the license from Bamco. Why they felt the need to reach out to Curran is unclear to me, given that Bamco's word on the subject seemed to be, hey, don't mix Ms. Pac with our other games, we got some legal stuff to work out. I guess maybe they could have helped come to an agreement with Curran on the royalties of this specific product, but I think maybe they should have kept it in their pants. I digress. AtGames claims that they've always been clear that they will not manufacture Ms. Pac-Man products for public release without express permission from Bandai Namco. They also allege that Bamco wanted to scoop up GCC's rights for cheap without letting them in on the fact that they could be making millions of dollars in advance royalties from companies who wanted to license the game. AtGames says they just wanted to make everyone a lot of money. Is that so wrong? Is it so wrong to make everyone a lot of money, Bamco? Huh? The specific amount that AtGames paid for GCC's royalty rights is $10 million, while they claim that Bandai Namco had been lowballing them. I couldn't find a specific number in the legal documents for Bamco's offer, but I've heard $2 million. I'll put on screen whether or not I could find evidence of that by the time I upload this. I'm very tired. Because Bamco was so quick to sue after AtGames did, in their view, nothing illegal or objectionable, they argue that Bamco are the ones doing harm, bringing sudden and severe negative attention to AtGames.
They sold their stake in the IP to AtGames, a company with a notoriously bad reputation amongst retro game enthusiasts.
I don't know what they mean. What could they be talking about? I don't know. To further their case, AtGames provides evidence that Bamco were aware of and had even approved a Ms. Pac-Man HDMI dongle they'd been developing, and also argued that Bamco was not only aware of the NES versions of their games being used in the infamous flashback unit, but had specifically requested screenshots on the box be replaced with the arcade versions, without requesting changes to the unit itself. Bamco expressed no problem with this during the unit's release or its ensuing backlash, happily collecting royalty checks and only deciding it was an issue a year later when they had some other beef with AtGames. They're essentially being accused of adding a non-issue to their suit out of spite. Editing John with another addition to this horrible mess. AtGames does indeed provide an email as evidence where a representative from Namco talks about using the NES versions of the games and says specifically that it is a gray area because even Bandai Namco of Japan isn't aware if other companies who help develop the games or publish them continue to hold rights over those versions, but suggests modifying the NES games to make them look more like the arcade versions. This implies that Bandai Namco did indeed know about the NES thing and was permissive of it directly. AtGames also argues that neither the arcade nor home versions are inherently superior, which is debatable, but whatever. This lays out the case for Bamco maliciously attacking AtGames solely for scooping up the rights they wanted. I want to circle back to an email sent by Bamco shortly before the lawsuit, used as an exhibit by AtGames, where they give an ultimatum. Either AtGames rescind whatever offer they made to the successor and keep their noses out of the copyright kerfuffle, or Bamco will not only terminate their relationship with AtGames, but they will also quote, ensure that there is zero income stream delivered pursuant to that agreement. In other words, if AtGames attains the GCC stake in Ms. Pac-Man, Bandai Namco will do everything in their power to ensure that it's a worthless investment for them. Now, the back and forth on who did what and what actions, if any, would be appropriate to take continued for a little over a year, with both companies settling out of court in late 2020. We don't know the exact details of this resolution, but it's been a good few years, so let's take a look at what's been happening with Ms. Pac since then to see if we can figure it out. As I mentioned, 2020 was Pac-Man's 40th anniversary, and in spite of a global pandemic and a lawsuit that lasted the entire year, he's still got a few chances to celebrate. Good for him. In May, a Pac-Man themed DLC pack for Minecraft was released, featuring nods to much of the franchise. Some of the skins include Professor Pac-Man, Miru from Pac-N-Pal, and a few obscenely deep cuts like Pac-Ranger from Pac-Man World 2 and Mr. Cookie from Pac-Man Party. Predictably though, there's no sign of Ms. Pac, which is made weirder by the fact that Pac Jr. and Pac Baby are there. I was thinking Ms. Pac took the kids this whole time, but maybe they split custody. Jury's still out. In October, a new Pac-Man game for the critically acclaimed acclaimed and beloved Google Stadia was released, again with no Ms. Pac. In November, as the lawsuit was winding down, the controversial AtGames Flashback Arcade Gotta Baja Brain Blast My Nuts Into Your Mouth console resumed sale for some reason, despite Bamco threatening never to work with AtGames again. Not sure if this didn't count considering it was an existing product, or if AtGames was right and they just wanted those sweet dollary dues. Could have been backstock too, I guess. Who knows? By the end of 2020, the lawsuit was over, so 2021's Pac-Man 99 definitely could have used Ms. Pac-Man if it had been settled in a way that Bamco found agreeable. Maybe then it's a bit of a red flag that in spite of its 28 different purchasable skins, not one of them features the girl in red. There is a Wonder Momo theme, but no playable Ms. Pac-Man. Think about that for a second. Things got even more interesting in 2022. The obligatory Valentine's tweet from the Pac-Man account featured the ghosts instead of the Ms, as they had in happier times. But that's nothing compared to the utter catastrophe that was the rest of the year. If you don't know where this is going, brace yourselves. If you do, then I will offer you my virtual two-dimensional shoulder to cry on, if you need it. It appears Bamco has tired of sitting on their hands and not reissuing games that so much as allude to the existence of Ms. Pac-Man. After the whole GCC thing blew up in their face with a plug-and-play shaped mushroom cloud, they appear to have gone full trial by fire, making good on their promise to render the AtGames investment as devoid of profit as possible. In April 2022, Pac-Land got a release on the Switch through Hamster's Arcade Archives line. This may seem unremarkable. This game has been re-released a million times. There's even a Smash Brothers stage based on it that retains the Ms. Pac cameo, which is actually really cool. What the hell is this? Despite being an emulated re-release of a very old game, an archival of the arcade, if you will, this particular version of Pac-Land has been modified. For those unfamiliar, Pac-Land is a 1984 arcade game which, despite its lack of mainstream recognition, is widely considered a deeply important and influential platformer. The original US release is an interesting curiosity in its own right because it models the characters off their designs from the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, but these are still Ms. Pac-Man and Pac-Baby. The game's re-releases usually leave the original Japanese graphics intact. This is something entirely new though. What Bandai Namco has done here is create entirely distinct sprites in order to replace Ms. Pac and her daughter with new, legally distinct characters. Say hello to Pac-Mom and Pac-Sis. One of the developers actually tweeted about his confusion over the change, and after a clarifying question from game developer and Pac-Man historian Ryan Silberman, he confirmed that Bamco was responsible for the change, not Hamster. Is it overdramatic to say that making these changes qualifies as defacing Pac-Land and rendering the utility of this reissue as a historical document non-existent? Because I don't think it is. A month later, Pac-Man Museum Plus was released. This compilation serves as a replacement for an older game called Pac-Man Museum, which was delisted in 2020
for reasons we do not fully understand.
Not only does Museum Plus feature the mommified version of Pac-Land, but it also painstakingly goes through each game that features Ms. Pac-Man and replaces her with the new hotness. In addition, the other members of Pac's family have received name changes and/or redesigns when they show up, which can be easily seen with the collectible figures you can obtain for all of them. That's Chomp Chomp, you liars! Now, why might they have done this? Well, I can't say for sure, but if we look at the history of each character, we might be able to make some educated guesses. Junior Pac-Man is from the game Junior Pac-Man, which was also developed by GCC. So while legal issues surrounding this particular character don't seem to exist, it's likely Bandai Namco wants to play it safe. Baby Pac-Man is also the titular character of her own respective game, this weird pinball hybrid thing that acclaimed plagiarist Tommy Tallarico owns.
At night, I always have to go to the bathroom.
While this one wasn't developed by GCC, it is another sequel that Midway is responsible for rather than Bandai Namco. So maybe a similar train of thought carries through. Plus, if you already have a Pac Bro, you may as well have Pac Sis. Why Professor Pac gets to remain untouched is a mystery, as he's also a Midway character. For what it's worth, I doubt anyone's willing to fight that legal battle. A few sources allude to there being some type of litigation between Midway and the original creators of that game back in the day, but information information is extremely limited, and it doesn't seem to bother Bandai now. Chomp Chomp originally comes from the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, but has shown up in numerous Namco-developed games, so this one's anyone's guess. The last game that actually dropped his name was Pac-N-Roll, where he's called Pac Dog, although it's unclear if that's even supposed to be the same dog. I wonder if there actually was some legal thing with Hanna-Barbera, or if they just wanted to cover their tracks more in light of the Ms. Pac lawsuit. Chomp Chomp is, however, my Pac buddy, so the new name does hold true. Anyways, like I said, every instance of Ms. Pac in this collection is scrubbed clean, except for one. There are 2 games called Pac-Man Arrangement here, and the second, from 2005, was originally released as part of Namco Museum Battle Collection on PSP. In its original release, there was a multiplayer mode where the second player controlled Ms. Pac-Man, something I'm surprised more Pac games don't do. Museum Plus removes this mode for, I assume, track covering reasons, but they neglected to remove her appearance in the credits. This is baffling for a couple reasons, one being that some previous ports of the game already removed the credits entirely. Arrangement 05 was newly ported to Unity for this collection, not being an emulation of a previous version, so maybe that has something to do with it. Additionally, when Namco Museum Battle Collection was released in Europe a few months after other regions, not only was Ms. Pac-Man the game removed from its lineup, but Ms. Pac-Man the character was also removed from Pac-Man Arrangement, being replaced by a version of Pac with a flower instead of a bow, both in multiplayer mode and in the credits. This, along with Pac-N-Roll referring to our leading lady as Pac-Girl, may be some of the first examples of Bandai Namco trying to erase my queen. Then again, the official website and instruction manual of that game do note that Pac-Girl will one day become Ms. Pac-Man. It's a prequel, so maybe that doesn't count. Anyway, point is, there's already a royalty-free version of Arrangement 05 they could have used. This particular rabbit hole goes even deeper though. This Pac-Man with a flower character also shows up in Namco Museum Remix and a cancelled Xbox 360 game, labeled Pac-Man Party on its prototype disc, not to be confused with Pac-Man Party on the Wii. No, this one is built off of Championship Edition and is instead sort of a Battle Royale version of that. Still following? These sprites actually go unused in this prototype and are swapped for a green Pac-Man. Maybe a floral Pac kissing regular Pac was still too close for comfort at the time. But I digress. Back to the present, on August 22nd, 2022, a remake of the original Pac-Man world came out, also using the replacement characters we've been talking about. There's actually some leftover repack animations and stuff in the data for Museum Plus, so maybe it was convenient to reuse the models. Let's break for a second so I can ask a random question that's been on my mind. What about Sue? For those of you who don't know, Ms. Pac-Man, the game, reused Inky, Blinky, and Pinky from the original, but for some reason renamed the orange ghost from Clyde to Sue. She would even turn up in later Pac-Man games, as well as the Hanna-Barbera cartoon, albeit usually recolored to purple to differentiate her from Clyde. For some reason though, the legal issues keeping Ms. Pac from us have never seemed to affect her, with Pac-Mania's border in Museum Plus proudly showing her name. She'd even already shown up a few times since the 2000s GCC lawsuit. Is she not technically a creation of GCC? Doug McRae, one of the developers of Ms. Pac-Man, claims to have named Sue after his sister, after all, so like, I suppose they didn't really do anything with the character design. She's orange in that original game, not purple. I think the purple design actually originates from the cartoon, so if they're worried about Chomp Chomp, would they not also be worried about Sue? If she were depicted as orange, would that be problematic? I have no more idea than you why this discrepancy exists, but I imagine it's because no one really cares that much. There's not exactly a lot of money to be made off the use of Sue. If GCC or AtGames or whoever really feels like making Bandai Namco break out the crayons every time they re-release Pac-Mania or Pac-Man 256, I guess they can take it up with them in court. Maybe Bamco could argue that their purple Sue is a different character from GCC's. I don't know, man. This thing's a whole mess. Let's just move on. I mentioned this earlier, but because of the wording of the original 1983 agreement made between GCC and Midway, GCC only received royalties from arcade machines if they had coin slots on them. Bandai Namco's been making use of this workaround for years, selling cabinets intended for home use, including our beloved mistress. Courtesy of Bamco's Amusement Division, PacManCave.com offers a wide variety of Pac-Man products. So if you're looking to upgrade your gamer dungeon with some Pac accessories like these pint glasses or a 1 $180 Ms. Pac-Man carpet, go for it, dude. I wonder if they have to pay royalties on that carpet. I'm inclined to say that they don't, because if you'll remember, Bandai Namco owns the rights to Ms. Pac-Man the character, but has to pay royalties to AtGame for electronic distribution of GCC's work. I'm guessing carpets, shot glasses, plushes, or any other merch of that nature doesn't qualify, but unfortunately, I don't have access to the full text of the lawsuits prior to the AtGames case, so it's hard to say. While I'm pondering this, let's actually take a second to try and assess who owns what, based on what we know. Bandai Namco owns Ms. Pac-Man, the game, and the character, and they can do whatever they want with either, with the stipulation that they have to pay royalties to AtGames for coin-operated arcade cabinets or electronic distribution, home console, handheld, or phone ports, but not for arcade machines that lack coin slots. They have to pay AtGames for these uses because the GCC successors sold them their Ms. Pac-Man related rights, meaning that they currently no longer own anything relating to her. It's unclear if Bandai Namco has to pay AtGames for uses of Ms. Pac-Man on non-electronic merchandise, but I personally don't think they do, due to the stipulation not being specifically mentioned by any source I can find, and because it doesn't line up with the electronic distribution quote that we know about because Steve Golson discusses it in a 2016 GDC talk. I'm also able to draw on 2 additional sources for further extrapolation. I got a comment on my original Ms. Pac-Man video from Maurice Molyneux, a former employee of Namco Networks Incorporated, a division of the company who worked on mobile games. He said he was brought in to do some depositions during the 2000s lawsuit because he'd been in charge of porting the game to phones and had technical knowledge of it. He wasn't privy to the final settlement and left Namco shortly after this, but he returned in 2013 and was put in charge of developing Pac-Man Plus Tournaments, a mobile title built off of the original Pac-Man. It adds things like extra mazes and costumes. Because the game was a modification of the original, as Ms. Pac-Man was, he had to, in his words, beg the legal department to tell him where the tripwires were in regards to Ms. Pac-Man, to avoid having something come across as too similar and end up having to pay royalties on a game that wasn't even Ms. Pac-Man. According to him, the no-no list included maze layouts from Ms. Pac, bouncing bonus items specific to Ms. Pac-Man, those being the pretzel, pear, and banana, and any type of randomized ghost behavior that might resemble GCC's version. I've had aforementioned Pac expert Ryan Silberman help me fact-check this script, and he mentioned that he has a contact at Bandai Namco's Amusement Division, who will remain anonymous, that finds stuff like the bar stools and posters being sold on their website kinda weird, maybe not even knowing where exactly the legal tripwires are. I have to imagine that not every employee at the company knows every little detail, but that's just a guess. Maybe because the amusement branch still sells Ms. Pac merch, their Twitter also occasionally posts about her, sometimes even joking about the legal situation.
Me when people ask me how they can play Ms. Pac-Man in 2022. Pass me the ox.
Hey, Bamco, who's that on the right?
Oh, it's the lovely redacted.
Meanwhile, the main Pac-Man account hasn't acknowledged my man's ex-wife since that International Women's Day tweet. The Valentine's tweets have continued just using Pac and the ghosts, not even opting for Pac-Mom. What is going on at this company? I wish I could wrap up the story with a nice little bow. Yeah, like that one. But unfortunately, this Cold War continues to rage on. As recently as July 2024, Bandai Namco has been caught erasing history, with the re-release of the arcade game Tinkle Pit apparently removing Ms. Pac's cameo, simply replacing it with Mr. Pac. It's hard to say if and when this will ever stop. AtGames might just continue not making any money off those rights they bought, while Bandai Namco keeps gaming's leading lady in her cage, only using her when they can maximize their own profits. As such, I don't really know how to end this video. Hey, what's up, Tinkle Pit Nation? This is John Content here. I'm gonna be ranking all the Ms. Pac-Man clones. My fucking phone just slid! God! Okay, I'm gonna rank these all on a tier list. If you disagree, you're not allowed to comment unless you come to my house and find me. So obviously in the S tier is Ms. Pac-Man. In this art, she's depicted really tastefully. She doesn't have her stupid, weird looking legs or kind of the odd elements of the current design. This is the platonic ideal of a Ms. Pac-Man design. Now, I would also put Pac-Girl in the high tier because if you'll remember, Pac-Girl is quite literally just Ms. Pac-Man but in prequel form. Not only that, her design is good, it's recognizable, and she has the best name of all these clones. Cylindria, I'm going to put in A tier because I don't think she actually qualifies as a Ms. Pac-Man clone, technically. She's enough to be her own character, she has a pretty good design. and I appreciate that they took the opportunity to actually attempt to do something different. Now, Pac-Man Girl is an F tier. Horrible name. The design is lazy as hell. That is just Pac-Man wearing a yellow bow. The color scheme is all messed up. She doesn't have drip. She doesn't have fashion. She can go to hell for all I care. Also, all these other chicks have eyelashes and eyebrows. This chick doesn't have either. She shaved her eyebrows like a little weirdo. Be wary of her. Now, this might be a controversial one. Pac-Mom, I think, looks really weird next to Pac-Man. People have pointed out that the eyes and the legs are off. But as a design on her own, I don't actually dislike her. I think the hat is pretty tasteful, pretty old-timey. It's very in the vein of, like, I always view Pac-Man as like an old-school kind of family man. I think Pac-Mom matches that aesthetic pretty well. I think that's pretty good. Now, Pac-Marie, I would put her actually probably also in S tier. I like her design about as much as regular Ms. Pac-Man. It's pretty close, but as far as hair goes, I think the little tuft of yellow hair as a ponytail is a nice touch. The pink color scheme works well for her. She has a very clean design, no complaint. She has a distinct personality too, which is more than I can say for a lot of these characters. For example, Pac-Man with a rose instead of a bow. Again, this is just Pac-Man. Looks better than Pac-Man Girl. I think she looks all right, but it's not really a character. C tier. Now, this last example is a sheer technicality. There was a Sanrio Pac-Man crossover line. Sanrio, of course, being the Hello Kitty, My Melody, Agretsuko company. And there were a couple pieces of merchandise. One of them, they like to do this a lot, where it's, a character from one franchise with elements of another character's design. Maybe they're dressed as them. I have an Arl from Puyo Puyo that's dressed as Hello Kitty. There's some Street Fighter ones. This, of course, is Pac-Man wearing Hello Kitty's bow. There was also a Dear Daniel Pac-Man, Dear Daniel being Hello Kitty's boyfriend. But when you think about it, this is Pac-Man wearing a pink bow. This is, in everything but name, this is Ms. Pac-Man. Now, it is listed as Pac-Man Hello Kitty, but this is Ms. Pac-Man on everything except name. And I think that I'm at a bit of a struggle of where to place this, because that brazen level of disregard for copyright law is very funny, but also it's a very lazy design. I'm gonna put her below Roseman in the D tier. Now, this is a definitive list. If you disagree, I've been working on this video for like a year. I know this better than you. Pac-Man is closer to me than you. Jesus also loves me more. So you can go die. Hey, fake gamers, thanks for sitting through all that. I'm here to do my little Patreon read, credits, addendums, all that fun stuff. Let's start with the patrons. Special thanks to all of my patrons who are scrolling across the screen right now, but especially to my $5 patrons in the Cosmic Kitties tier who paid to have their names read aloud. The Cosmic Kitties are, of course, AJ, Bowties and Glasses, Bert Giant Fire Ring Cole, Griffin Herald, Gritspot, June Crash Radio, Nyako, and Pac Jeff. I know a couple patrons recently have altered their pledges or stopped pledging due to financial reasons, and I just want to take the opportunity to say that's totally fine. I get it. The economy is pretty rough right now, so please don't feel bad if you've done that. It's honestly really cool that you've given any money to me at all. I think that's pretty sick. And if you're watching this, then that means you're still watching my videos, which I also appreciate. You know who else I appreciate is all the people who helped provide voices for this video, like Zarithia, drawn by AJ, Greg Cubed, and Sten. Shout out also to Brock the Archivist for helping get in touch with Zarithia. Zari makes good stuff. You should watch her. You should also watch Greg Cubed. You should also watch Sten, and you should follow Drawn by AJ on your platform of choice. Big shout out to Ryan Silberman and Jackie XKH for helping me fact check this video. They're some of the foremost Pac-Man experts, so I really appreciate them taking the time out of their day to do that for me. Oh, patrons also got to see this video early, by the way. They got to help me check if it was ready for you. I have actually been trying to make more use of the Patreon and give people more incentives. I've been uploading these little rambly, unscripted things. I've been doing polls for what games to play on stream. I actually did a poll for which script of some of my upcoming videos that people wanted me to focus on, so I'm focusing on that now. yeah, if you are interested, maybe give that a look. But otherwise, that's cool too. In the meantime, though, thank you for watching this far. I appreciate it. And please don't take the thing I said about Jesus loving me more too seriously. Jesus also loves you, just not as much as me. Okay, bye!